Hi, everybody. This is the Higher Ed TIG, sometimes known as the Assessment in Higher Education TIG meeting. We're meeting today. It's the last day of July 2024, July 31st. But it's not about me, it's about the Higher Ed TIG. So I'm going to pass it over to the Higher Ed TIG chair, Chad Key. Take it away.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for coordinating here. I'm Chad Key, the co-chair of the TIG with Nidhi, who will be facilitating our discussion for today as co-chair for the next couple of months, and Nidhi will be taking in the chair seat beginning October at our conference. So we're really excited about this session, really excited about where we're going and where we're headed with the Higher Ed TIG. So really appreciate you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today and be a part of this conversation. So I will pass it to Nidhi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to share what I've learned over the last 3 decades conducting surveys. Since this is organized like a fireside chat, I won't go into each of the bullet points that you'll see. First off, everyone can see the screen, right? Okay. I should have checked that before. So I won't go through each of the bullet points because that won't leave much time for Q&A. So, I'll just chat about a few things that kind of stand out that I feel you may not find in standard books that, I've kind of learned through experience. And I also look forward to sharing from your experience during the fireside, during the Q&A, because anytime I attend a session, it looks like I learn more than I, give. So with that, we'll jump into this. Like I said, there's Q&A at the end. That said, if you have any clarificatory questions, please do chime in because it may help others as well. If there's anything, that will help clarify things. So please don't hesitate to jump in for that. So the outline. I'm going to just briefly touch on the different types of survey formats, the types of objectives surveys can be used, to achieve. Then I'll talk about actually designing the survey instrument. The bulk of today's presentation will be about, how to design an effective survey instrument and how to raise response rates. The last bullet you see here is about data analysis, report generation, and action, which comes kind of after collection of the data. We probably won't get deep into that, but remember that drives everything, right? It's like working backwards. The whole point of conducting surveys, collecting data is ultimately to drive some action policy. So in that sense, it'll be subliminally present throughout the presentation. There are many formats, and I'm sure you can think of many more. But today we'll focus on the online format for surveys. I'm quite sure many of the things will be generalizable to other formats as well, but we'll focus mainly on the online format. Survey objectives, goes without saying, the primary purpose is to collect hard data. Because without that, it's kind of hard to advocate for things. It's kind of hard to, choose what action to take. So at a broad level, that's the purpose. I'm going to focus here more on survey objectives related to higher education. But again, many of these may be applicable to other settings as well. So the first bullet that you see here after the fill data gaps is evaluate, improve, initiate interventions. We've used at my university, we've used surveys a lot to serve that purpose. And to that end, we directly ask questions in surveys about what intervention might be more useful for the students. So for example, we did a first generation needs assessment survey. And among other things, we gave students the option that out of these interventions, which one do you think would be most useful for you? Right? Because we didn't have resources to implement all of them. So we just directly, to make the survey actionable, we just put it out there. And then based on the responses we got, we initiated, a bunch of interventions. There's also the word evaluate there. I think people often, not often, sometimes people overlook the fact that surveys can be an amazingly effective instrument for program evaluation, especially in an education setting where it's kind of hard to implement randomized trials. It's kind of hard to control for confounding variables because there may be many, many interventions simultaneously going on. So in that context, a well-designed survey can not only allow you to see what the program effect is, but also to allow, to some extent, even quantify what could be, the contribution of that independent. We won't have an opportunity to get into that level of granularity in this presentation. That I think requires its very own presentation. But suffice to say that that's an important objective that surveys can serve. We use it at my university, again, a lot to identify students who need help. Sometimes we directly ask. We have a non-returning survey. And in that survey, we ask students who were registered in a semester but did not show up in the following semester, why did you not re-enroll? Did you need help? What kind of help did you need? And then on a live basis, I provide that information to the help desk, which then proactively reaches out to those students to better understand how we can help them re-enroll. Of course, the students who say they did not re-enroll because they got a job or they transferred to another university, that's fine, right? But the students who did not re-enroll because they needed help, we just want to make sure that they get the help that they need. We also use our survey to prepare for new admits, to understand what challenges they anticipate, and we ask about them. That way, we are better prepared because each cohort can be a little different. And this allows us to customize our services to the incoming cohort. These surveys, we call them enrolling surveys. They go out to the transfer students as well as the FTICs, the freshmen. So we're able to kind of proactively reach out to these students based on what they said, what they say about what are the bigger challenges they expect to face, and kind of make sure that when they come to the university, they're linked to the right resources. Another thing I've highlighted here is provide information. I think we sometimes don't realize that surveys are not just a tool for collecting information, but providing information. Whether it's the enrolling survey or the first-gen survey, or we did a basic needs survey, we use the surveys as tools to provide information to students about the various resources available at our university. So there may be one section in the survey that asks about, are you aware that the health services are completely free to students? And then they can say yes, no. So it's more designed as a public service announcement. We'll have a bunch of things in there. Were you aware that you can get laptops, that you can, without any fee, you can loan laptops? Were you aware? So it becomes like a means of providing information to them as well as providing information to us about how well our students are aware of these services. And if not, then obviously we have homework to do, right? In terms of making sure that more students realize that we offer these services. The survey instrument itself, I think unless we're talking about a pulse survey or something, very, very quick and dirty survey about something, typically most students that we implement require serious thinking behind it. You don't want to just jump into, tell yourself, okay, today afternoon, I'm going to design a questionnaire and I'll be done. It's very rare that you'll end up with an effective survey like that. So there are many stages to making sure that you end up with a, actionable and useful survey. one of the main ways to ensure that it'll be an effective survey is to involve all the stakeholders. I cannot stress how important it is to involve the key stakeholders. Again, to give an example, a year or so ago, we implemented a basic needs survey. So obviously the first step was to understand, how do we define basic needs? The different people at the university, like there's one office that deals with transportation. We also have Comet Cupboard. We provide, we have a food pantry. We have, the technology side. So for a student, all these different types of things go into ensuring that their basic needs are being met or not, right? That was the point of the survey, to understand the extent to which the basic needs of our students, undergraduate and graduate, are being met or not met, so we can know where the gaps are. Now, let me give one example, the transport side. I knew nothing about, what types of public transport our university provides, what are the issues with it, are the students who don't have their own private transport, are their needs being fulfilled? So I contacted the person in charge of that office, which proved a bit hard. So then I looked at the org chart and then tried to contact someone who I was ultimately able to reach out to. The reason it's so important is because now I had someone who knew the ins and outs of that service that was being provided. They knew the constraints they were operating under. They knew what levers they had in their control to change. And so the questions suddenly became so much more actionable because they were coming directly from the office that's in charge of that service. And the same thing we did with the health side, the technology side. Also, it makes sure that people are not on the defensive. When the results come, when the survey findings come back, when the data comes back, because these offices help me design the verbiage, they're not put on the defensive. We're not telling them, hey, 30% of the students are saying they're very dissatisfied, right? Because that puts people on the defensive. And that's, in my experience, often very counterproductive. Idea is to empower people, give them the information they need in order to improve their services. And for that, stakeholder involvement, I find, is just, absolutely key to designing. It takes time. The $1 million question is not whether you should involve them, but how. And it requires tenacity, it requires time, and just transparency and honestness, right? That this is what we're trying to accomplish, and I need your help. What types of changes do you think you might be able to implement? And let's put the questions around those. So for example, in the transport question, we actually asked students who were using the bus service, out of these changes, which ones do you think would be more useful for you? Increasing the frequency, making the buses run early, making the buses run on weekends, taking the buses to grocery stores. So we had really hard data at the end of the survey for this group to be able to make changes. The survey platform is also very important. I use Qualtrics. I'm not paid by them, but I find it very helpful because it allows me to do so many things seamlessly. I'm sure there are other platforms out there that might also allow it, but it's really important to make sure that you have a platform that will allow you to implement the survey in the way you want it implemented. The role of piloting. This I learned very early on when I was a PhD student. I had conducted a whole bunch of surveys in India. And one of the questions in the survey was, ages of different kids. I was looking at the demand for primary schooling in rural India. And when we did the pilot, I've lived in India, but I've not lived in rural areas. And it came as a complete surprise to me that just a simple question like, what is the age of your children, was taking us over an hour to guess, even to get some kind of estimate of that age, because many of the parents did not know. They would say things like, oh, she was born the year my cow had a calf. Obviously, I don't know when the cow had a calf, right? So in the final survey, we changed that question and we started using objective measures like height, BMI, other ways to try to get at age. But I would not have known this had we not piloted the instrument. Similarly, at UTD, before doing the basic needs survey, we piloted it, and so many questions changed once I had so many students take the pilot survey, because some of the verbiage that seemed very clear to me was not clear, especially to some of the international students. We have a lot of international students, and things, we may take for granted may not be very clear to them. So it's really important, I think, to involve students early on in the piloting stage. I also find it very helpful to go through the IRB, even though it's not always strictly necessary in higher ed. If you're doing a survey purely for program improvement, then you may not need to go through IRB, but I've made it a policy to do it because, one, there's a fresh pair of eyes to look at it, which makes the survey more effective. Something I may have overlooked, something may be perhaps invasive and I didn't realize. So it's always good to have the IRB to look at it. Plus, anytime you want to share the findings, if you find something really useful, one way to raise the effectiveness of the survey is to share those findings. And if you don't run it through IRB, you won't have the freedom to take it to conferences and share, some important things you've learned with a larger audience. The final bullet here is, the different attributes of a good survey instrument. As you can see, these are all linked, right? I mean, I've separated them out, but one affects the other. But most of today's, remaining time, I'll be spending on, what are the attributes of a good survey. First of all, alignment with objectives. Again, I cannot stress this more. Every question, I think, needs to go through the litmus test of what are you going to do with that data once you get it? Is it actionable for you? And if it doesn't pass that litmus test, it's best not to keep that question, because real estate in a survey is very precious. You want to keep the length of the survey as short as you can. It affects the response rate. It affects what you actually end up doing with that data. So it's really important to make sure that it's aligned with whatever your objective is. And like we've said before, the objectives need to be, clarified kind of early on. I won't get that much into the validity, reliability, and those things. Those are available in standard books. I'll get to some of the things that, I've learned over the experience, through my experience conducting surveys. Objectivity. Keeping your survey unbiased is very important. Pilot surveys help quite a bit with this, but just training, if you have a group of people doing the survey, it's really important to train them. Again, using my India example, it was pretty funny. I had family help to conduct some of the surveys because I didn't speak the language in some of the rural areas. And it was really important to drill into everyone. The way you ask questions has to come across as totally unbiased. You can't say, don't you think this is happening? That's not unbiased, right? And so just ensuring that questions are asked in a manner that don't load the question one way or the other. The other is you need to ask you need to address one issue per question. It's avoiding what we call double barrel question. If you ask 2 or 3 things, for example, did you worry about skipping a meal and were you hungry? How many times did you worry about skipping a meal or were you hungry in the last week? Now you've got 2 things and it gets confounded, right? You don't want to do that. Similarly, in the validity, if you ask someone, how many times did you skip a meal in the last week? You need to know, did they skip it because they didn't have the money? Did they skip it because they didn't have the transport? Did they skip it because they didn't have time to eat a meal, right? All those things need to be very clear in the question so that when you get the responses, they're not muddied by what could have driven students to skip a meal, right? You want that kind of accuracy is very important because that has direct bearing on what would be the right response to that response in terms of the right action. What would be the right policy to respond to those, to that kind of data? The timing is also very important. You don't want, obviously, to send a survey in the middle of an exam week. You want to make sure it's not going at a time when many other surveys are already in circulation. Some things I've learned that were counterintuitive to me is that during holidays, students, at least our students, have repeatedly told me that's a good time. We used to think that's sacred time. Don't touch Thanksgiving. Don't touch. But they're like, no, that time we don't have classes. We have more free time at that during holidays. We've already talked about the length of the survey. There are many ways to reduce the length without compromising what you need. One is to use display logic. Again, it depends on the survey platform. But if you use display logic, then everyone doesn't have to see every question, right? Right there, you kind of customize the survey to different subgroups within your respondent population. Again, the other way you can shorten is to randomize. If the sample size is large enough, like the basic needs survey we went out to 35,000, more than 35,000 students. So we could randomize questions and yet get very good quality information while keeping the survey shorter than it would have been had we not randomized. Representativeness. One of the biggest issues with surveys is self-selection, right? Because if students are self-selecting into who responds, you will not get accurate information. So it's really important to put effort into making sure that the survey responses are representative. If possible, you also want to add some comparison. Like in the basic needs survey, we asked a question about how would you handle if you had an emergency expense of $400? Now, this is something that's asked by the US government and through Gallup survey. So we were able to compare the responses of our students to the larger population, which is always helpful, as a benchmark. Closed and open-ended surveys. I think that's I really believe in mixed methods. You obviously don't want too many open-ended questions. They're hard to, analyze at the end. But I think a few are critical, and they really contain gold mines in terms of the underlying mechanisms. The closed surveys will give you very good quantifiable information, but sometimes to understand what was going on, why did someone choose a response, it's really important to have some open-ended questions. And again, they can be randomized so that, you can get answers to quite a few open-ended questions without having to burden each student with that many. Comprehensiveness of options. Very often we forget that students may not remember some things. If you ask someone and you don't give the option of, I don't remember, or I'm not sure, they will be forced to choose something, even if it's not accurate. So it's always good to give the option not applicable, prefer not to answer, or none of the above, just to make sure, go over each question and make sure it's, if a student is not in a position to answer, they have an out so that they're not forced to select an option that's not really accurate. Another way you can make surveys effective is navigation. This is something that I think sometimes we don't give enough importance to. Simple things like back arrows, telling students, you don't have to complete the survey. Your responses will get saved. That can raise the response rates a lot. If students know that, okay, they're 5 minutes now, they can do 5 minutes and they can come back to it later. Just allowing students to see how much progress they've made, maybe a progress bar. Simple things like that can contribute towards making for an effective survey. And of course, you need to align it to your population. Like I said, for the international students, sometimes you may have to define certain things like first gen. Just put the definition in there. This is how we're defining first gen. That way you don't get muddy responses, right? Everyone knows what you mean by that. Anonymous and confidential, they're not the same thing, right? But if it's an anonymous survey, you typically need a section on background information, right? Otherwise, you have no filters. You have no way to slice and dice your data. If in an anonymous survey, you don't collect that information. So just tell the students, we are collecting this information because it's an anonymous survey, and this is what will allow us to gain useful information. The time frame for recall is also important. If we ask a student, 3 years ago in the 5th week of this year, oh, how many times did you skip a meal? There's no way you're getting an accurate answer, right? But if you ask them in the last week or the last month, how many times did you skip a meal because you could not afford the expenses, you're more likely to get accurate responses. And in this day and age, of course, making things mobile friendly is very critical. The data analysis and report generation, like I said, we won't get deep into this, but one of my little images in the beginning was about in God we trust, everyone must bring data. To that we can add the right data. And here, I think the right interpretation is very important. Correlation is not causation. Very often we're like, oh, this student group is more likely to skip meals. So, sometimes we have A causing B, whereas there could be so many other reasons why we're observing the correlations we're observing between certain student groups and certain responses. So it's really important to have people who realize that just looking at raw cross tabs could actually be very confusing. So right interpretation, having people on board who will provide the right interpretation and just doing some capacity building within the university. We are asking everyone to make data-driven decisions without always ensuring that we build the capacity for them to, really understand the nuances of the data. So that's very important. What sometimes the slicers we use could be counterproductive. So we have to be aware of the implications that if we break the survey down by a certain student group, could it actually have an adverse effect on that group, So understanding those implications is key to creating the right kind of report. So it gets the type of action that would be productive and useful for the students. Data visualization has come a long way. So these days that helps a lot, using some kind of, whether it's Tableau or PBI, some way to allow, people to interact with the data that you've collected. Awareness of constraints is equally important, and not being judgy about, so based on our data, we recommend that you should do ABC, right? I think very often we may not know the constraints that different offices have. So it's really important to create custom reports for each group separately so that others don't, judge groups without knowing their constraints. And that's why I really strongly believe in creating custom reports, and Qualtrics really allows you to do that quite seamlessly. And finally, advocacy and action, which is what it's all about. So involving the students, I've found from the very beginning, has really, really helped in all of these things. What happened? Response rates. Maybe I skipped the slide, so sorry about that. Sending reminders, there's no substitute to it. Each time I send a reminder, I can see a blip in the response rate. So it's going down, 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 reminder, going down, down, down. And I sometimes send 8 or 9, I've even sent 10 reminders. And students have told me, please send reminders. They don't get annoyed. Some of them may, but a lot of them appreciate the reminders. The sender's name is also critical to the response rate. If the students are familiar with the person, they trust the person, they're more likely to respond to the survey. Incentives can go a long way, but they can also be counterproductive, which we don't realize, because certain types of incentive can create self-selection bias in your responses. So you need to be very aware of that. We've already talked about the length, the justification and implications. Involving stakeholders can also greatly increase your response rate. Like for the basic needs survey, I had involved student organizations, student groups. So already the word was out there that this survey could directly improve the types of services they receive. And so we got an overwhelming response to that survey. Partial responses, again, depending on the software you're using, if you store partial responses, you at least have, for the beginning questions at least, you have a high response rate, right? Why throw away good data, even if it's not a complete survey? We've also combined surveys, like the enrolling and non-enrolling. Because of the timing of the survey, sometimes the enrolling survey ends up going to students who may have decided not to enroll. So we put that branch, right? So if you've not enrolled, you end up taking the non-enrolling survey. If you've enrolled, you take the enrolling survey. And we do the same when we send out the non-enrolling survey. And later we collate those responses. So we're not losing out on students who, ended up getting the wrong survey because of the timing of the survey. I think I will leave it out there. Hopefully we have time left. I know I spoke longer than I intended to. Sorry about that. But yes, anyone, if you have
So
any
many things.
questions, please
Well, we're
chat.
gonna, just so you know, we're gonna get into the full-on questions after I stop the recording. But before I do that, I thought I'd give a chance back to Chad or Nidhi, if you want to introduce the rest of the TIG leadership, so they can say a little bit about the assessment in higher ed TIG, or what we just call the higher ed TIG. And Chad, I don't know if Chad stepped away. Oh no, there he is. Chad, did you want to say a little bit about the TIG and who our group is and anything about the program?
Yeah, sure. Maybe we could just allow the TIG leaders to introduce themselves and their role. I know some of you placed that in the chat, but it would be great to put a face with your comments in the chat. So maybe let's start with Kevin, then Rajiv.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Keene. I'm at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and I serve as the program co-chair for the Assessment of Higher Education TIG. And I'm recognizing some of your names because you helped to review proposals for us. So I just want to start out by thanking you all for taking the time to review those proposals. We're also excited to hopefully meet you at this upcoming conference. We have quite a few good presentations coming up, so hopefully you'll check that out. I think it's been posted in the program as of today on the website, so would encourage you to do that.
Thank you, Kevin. And Rajiv?
Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. My name is Rajiv Ramdad. I currently work as a program coordinator for the Boonshaw School of Medicine in Dayton, Ohio. I also serve as program co-chair with Kevin Keene, and thank you again for everyone who submitted a proposal this year. And we look forward to seeing all of you at AA in October. We are definitely looking forward to connecting with you, but also getting feedback from you so that come next year, we could be able to provide even more opportunities to connect and also to have workshops like this where we can sort of collaborate and learn together.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rajiv. And we're also, one of the things we're doing is we have administered a survey, perfect with the discussion, right? To gather information from our TIG members around things to do and topics. And Rajiv, if you have that link and if you could put it in the chat for us, that would be awesome. And we would welcome your input and your responses, so that can help us schedule, identify topics, as well as, just long-term planning for the TIG. So.
And one of the things I know you're really interested in, Chad, is whether we want to continue with the name of assessment and higher education TIG, or just higher education TIG. So that's something I know we've been talking about.
Yeah, and that's one of the questions on the survey, and to get input from the members here who can respond to that question, so that we can get your input, your voices in that decision as we gather responses and share that with AEA to kind of move that in one direction or the other. But we are looking at dropping the assessment term and just higher ed TIG. So we'll keep you posted as that moves forward, and hopefully we'll be able to announce that shift at the conference.
So if you love the part assessment in or of higher education, you need to start fighting for it, because I think it's likely to be going away. But anyway, I'm leading the survey at this point. With that, everybody who's here, stick around. Everybody who's on YouTube, we're glad you made it. Keep an eye out. We'll have more sessions soon. We're going to try and do something maybe monthly. I don't know. That'll be up to the group. But we're going to get into the Q&A portion of the session now.